Today's video is brought to you by Skillshare. More from them in a bit. I consider myself something of an optimist. Glass half full kind of guy. Always excited for what the future might bring. That's a lie. That's a dirty lie. If you've seen any of my videos ever, you probably know that I'm more than a bit skeptical when it comes to emerging technologies. And while I've made many videos making fun of this and this and this and this, I've usually been pretty lenient on VR. It's just so neat. I mean, imagine a future where these headsets are as thin and lightweight as sunglasses. If the batteries could last all day while displaying every screen you wanted all around your face, in your head, in your house, all the screens you want. I've always felt that the potential is here. It's there. It's somewhere. With enough time, with the right tech, with the right price points and software, these silly little glasses could become the next big thing. VR's been in a weird spot for the past 30 years or so. Everybody keeps saying, hey, this stuff is pretty good, but it's not quite there yet. Almost ready for prime time, but maybe wait a few more years for the tech to catch up and the prices to go down. And 30 years later, the tech still has a lot of catching up to do, and the prices still have a lot of going down to do. A few years ago, I thought, this is it. This is the time where these headsets are finally gonna break into the mainstream. We're gonna get our cheap VR headsets, followed by our cheap AR headsets, followed by our cheap VR AR hybrid headsets that would continue to get more cheaper and more smaller and more useful until everybody wanted one. Animating is hard. A few months ago, I wanted to try out a new animation tool, but it was too complicated, and I gave up because I was tired and my brain hurt. And that's why I'm glad that I started using Skillshare, the sponsor of today's video. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives with thousands of classes led by industry experts across film, illustration, design, freelance, productivity, and more. Skillshare can help you take your career skills, hobbies, passions, or side hustles to the next level. I've been taking the class Getting Started with Procreate Dreams by Lisa Bardot, so I can actually animate faster, better. Look at him go. During the summer nights, I like to sit outside and draw me some pictures on my iPad, and now I can do just that while making them wiggle and jiggle around. All thanks to Skillshare. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today. Anyway, I figured once the Meta Quest 2 started selling like tens of millions of units, okay, things are popping off now. Finally, we have an inexpensive headset that is pretty good, that doesn't require a powerful gaming PC to use it, and a lot of people seem genuinely interested in this thing. But that interest did not last very long. Most VR users stop using their headsets after just a few weeks. That's bad. Like, imagine if people bought a new game console or phone or computer and then just simply stopped turning it on after a month or so. Would you call that a successful product? And a lot of people are saying, well, this is just because there's not enough software out there yet. There's not enough games. There's not enough stuff for people to do in VR. So of course they're not gonna spend a lot of time inside the headsets. But I disagree. I mean, I agree there's not a lot to do in the headsets, but I disagree that this is the reason why people stop using their headsets. Instead, I think it's just VR's kind of annoying. Maybe not to you, maybe you love it, maybe you're all on board the VR hype train, but it seems like for most people, putting on this headset, it's more of an irritant than an entertainment. Okay, so the first time you try this stuff out, most people are gonna say, wow, this is amazing. Look at this digital virtual world I'm inside. Look at my hands. So much potential, so many possibilities. But after a while, that novelty starts to wear off. In reality, non-virtual reality starts to set in. Just to use this thing, you gotta put the thing on, put the headset on, adjust the straps and the lenses, gotta make sure they're focused, make sure you have ample space to walk around in. Oh no, the battery died. I gotta go plug it in. Gotta wait a few hours, then I gotta put it back on, adjust the straps, adjust the lenses, make sure I have ample space to walk around, and oh no, the room's too dark because it's night, because it took so long to charge, and now it can't track my hand movement. So I gotta take off the headset, turn on the lights, put the thing back on, rinse and repeat. I know there's a huge niche for this thing. But that's just it. It's still a niche. Right now, VR is still very much an enthusiast technology. And for a brief while there, in the early 2020s, I agreed that it seemed like it was, it's about to go mainstream. But looking back, interest as a whole is going down rather than going up, which is not the trajectory that you want for your emerging technology. PSVR 2, the PlayStation 5 VR headset, has been a complete disaster. It costs more than the PS5 itself, and it already looks like Sony is giving up on it. While the Meta Quest 2 was a smash hit, really brought VR into the mainstream, its successor, the Quest 3, has barely sold a fraction of those sales numbers since its launch. And while the pricing definitely has something to do with that, it also just seems like interest is starting to fade away for these headsets. Now, some analysts in the industry, they're blaming it on transitioning technology from blah, 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 blah. Shut up. People are just losing interest. But surely that Apple headset, that Apple VR headset, the Vision Pro, that's doing all right, right? Right? Wrong. It is not doing well. Okay, come on. Everybody knew that the Apple Vision Pro wasn't gonna sell that well. I mean, this thing cost as much as a used car. I don't think Apple expected this thing to sell that well. I think they made it for developers and tech enthusiasts to start developing applications for future headsets. Future headsets that would get cheaper, that would have millions of people buying them. And they wanted to make sure that there was gonna be a lot of apps on this VR app store before the tech really took off, But even still, even with the lowest of expectations, it doesn't seem like Apple's experiment has succeeded. Reports are saying that right now, Apple is considering not making a Vision Pro 2, not making another one of these headsets, and they're just gonna wait until they can deliver a cheaper headset altogether. Now that sounds like a good idea, because again, things cost a lot of money, but reports also state that Apple is having a lot of trouble of getting the price down while keeping the headset's vital features intact. Oh, and that price that they're trying to get it down to is like $1,500 to $2,000. Okay, I'm just starting to think that there's been some horrible miscalculation here. All around. Apple, Meta, all the people making these headsets, they don't want to just sell a niche product to a few million people. They want to sell hundreds of millions of headsets. With the kind of money that has been spent on this stuff, it is pretty clear that these companies are expecting this thing to replace the smartphone. They think that in the future, instead of spending $1,000 on a slab of glass that you shove in your pocket, people are gonna spend $1,000 for a slab of glass that you shove in your face. And nobody wants to get left behind if phones become antiquated. All the biggest corporations on the planet probably have had some ambitions to make headsets. Make no mistake, this VR AR thing has been viewed as a potential successor to the smartphone. But the problem here is that people, specifically Mr. Apple and Mr. Zuckerberg, and even me, seem to have forgotten why the smartphone was so successful to begin with. So everybody brings up the fact that when the iPhone first got announced, a lot of people thought it was gonna be a failure. And of course, they all looked very foolish because within like a decade, the smartphone went from being a luxury to a necessity. Like more people have smartphones than anything. But how did this happen? I think we all kind of assumed that it was because the smartphone was such a valuable tool, but that's probably not it. That's definitely not it. Most new tech runs into a catch-22. It's a problem that all tech needs to solve. You can't just make good hardware and expect it to sell well. You also need people to make good software to accompany that good hardware. People do not buy a video game console box if there are no video games for it. But you can't get people to make good software unless people buy the hardware first. You see the problem here? Now, smartphones got around this pretty easily. The iPhone didn't even have an app store at launch, and it didn't really need one. Just being able to access the internet anywhere at any time was a big enough draw for early smartphone adopters. More people started buying up more smartphones, factories started making more smartphones, and the individual components got cheaper But also these components could be used in other things that weren't just smartphones. The solid state and flash storage systems could be used on computers. The LCD displays were getting put into TVs. Transistors, Moore's Law. It benefited by all these advancements that were occurring in the consumer electronics market in the 2000s. And finally, these smartphones got so cheap that buying a normal cell phone didn't make sense anymore. I mean, think about it. For just a few extra dollars, you could get access to the entire internet. Nowadays, it's kind of hard to buy a normal cell phone. I mean, you can do it, but it doesn't make a ton of sense. But it's genuinely difficult to even get a landline. So soon enough, it didn't matter if you wanted a smartphone or not, you kind of just had to get one. I mean, look, your 130-year-old uncle probably doesn't know how to use a computer and probably didn't want to get a smartphone either, and I can't blame him. Technology is scary. I mean, seriously, think about it. If you didn't grow up using a mouse and keyboard, and you're just starting to try to do this thing for the first time, it would actually be pretty confusing. There is nothing all that intuitive about knowing that moving the mouse in this direction will move the cursor in this direction, or the fact that left click just means confirm. But smartphones, they were different. Even toddlers can learn how to use a smartphone quickly. People who have never seen a computer before could learn quickly. Because, I mean, it's as simple as it can get. You touch thing and thing happens. It's just natural. It makes sense. And look, while I get that today your 130-year-old uncle might not understand why his phone is crashing when he has 100 browser tabs open, he can still use the phone. He can still call people or text people or do whatever he does in his twilight years, because it's just that easy. A lot of different factors and variables all had to align perfectly for this technology to take over the world. It had to offer something truly revolutionary, which was the ability to access the internet from anywhere. It had to be cheap enough that anybody could afford it, even children in Africa who couldn't afford SpaghettiOs, and it had to be easy enough to use that anybody could use it. This is really unique. This is a unique set of things happening all at once. But for some reason, ever since then, Silicon Valley has made the mistake of expecting that every new gadget, every new form factor is going to have the same impact on society that this smartphone has. And surprise, surprise, they did not. Nothing has. Look, I remember when people expected that the iPad would replace the desktop computer and the laptop. And guess what? That didn't happen. That did not happen. Some people might use their iPads like their laptops, but that's kind of more of a novelty. And with the Apple Watch announcement, people expected a brave new world of wearables. And yeah, smartwatches definitely got more popular after Apple introduced their device, but people were also expecting that the smartwatch would become just as important as the smartphone. People were saying, hey, no one's gonna bother whipping out their phone in the future. They're just gonna look at the wrist so they can send a text or watch a movie or do whatever they do on their phones, but it'd be faster and simpler because it's on the wrist. And that didn't happen. Most people just bought them either as a fashion statement, out of curiosity, or they just used them as fitness bands. The tablet and the smartwatch did not replace anything. They just created new tiny markets that haven't really had that much of an impact on the greater tech market. And as time goes on, I'm starting to think that these glasses, these VR, AR glasses, they're gonna have probably the same legacy as these technologies. Not something world-changing, but something useful for a select group of people. An accessory rather than a necessity. All those benefits that smartphones had, smart glasses, they don't have that. Using them is not intuitive or natural, and it never will be. In fact, it's a pretty wonky experience with a strong learning curve. I mean, think about this. How do you copy text with a headset? How do you switch applications? How do you navigate through anything? Do you try to pinch the text? Do you try to tap on the side of your headset? Do you look at it and you blink twice to copy and blink 3 times to paste? Do we need controllers? Do we not need controllers? There's no standard way to do this or anything with a headset, and there probably never will be. Maybe you will be able to figure out how to manipulate 30 windows at once surrounding you in VR, but your 130-year-old uncle is not going to be able to figure that out. And that does limit the number of people who would adopt this tech. It takes it down from billions to millions. Also, while the smart glasses will definitely get cheaper, it's not going to be anything like the smartphones. If you want something that's as thin as sunglasses and as powerful as a desktop computer, if you want something that you can still use as glasses even when the battery dies, you're going to need some weird display technology. Some lasers or projection beams, some HoloLens kind of stuff. This technology exists, but it's not necessarily cheap. And then you have the issue of battery life. And this is a big one. Look, the Apple headset doesn't last that long, and it needs a stupid battery pack attached to it to even not last that long. So the idea of a headset that is as thin and lightweight as normal glasses, while lasting like 8 hours on a single charge, while constantly displaying all these screens and images and American Dad YouTube clips in 3D space, that just ain't gonna happen anytime soon. Battery tech is probably gonna get better in the future, sure, but unless you got like some science fiction graphene sort of stuff, don't expect these glasses to last all day, which means they can't replace your smartphone. Okay, so I saw this video of a guy showing off his workstation in VR with the Apple Vision Pro. And at first glance, it's kind of cool. Like, he's got his Mac set up with a bunch of different displays, some TVs, some more TVs, lots of TVs. The sticky note on the fridge right there that is. But it makes you start to think, you could pay $3,500 to get this and be able to live inside this digital world for 2 hours, or you could buy a lot of TVs. TVs are not that expensive. Like, for the same price as an Apple Vision Pro, you could actually buy 40 brand new televisions. Place them all over your house, and you won't need to buy new ones in 3 years when the hardware is outdated and Apple wants to sell you a new one. I love the idea of being able to work on multiple displays on my computer at once, but I already do that. That's a technology that has existed for a long time, VR not required. And just so much of this stuff, of this technology, is starting to feel like that to me. Like, it's cool, it's interesting, but do we need it? I feel like big tech is hoping that consumers will compromise, that people will adopt these things out of curiosity in spite of their flaws, but it just doesn't work that way. People don't really care that much about new tech just for the sake that it's new tech. You might, I might, but most people don't. If headsets were ever going to replace smartphones, they would have to be better than smartphones in every single way. These things would have to be as thin as normal glasses, as easy to put on as a pair of shades, more powerful than phones, more convenient to use, cheaper, a similar battery life, and even when that happens, there's one aspect of these glasses, of this technology, that nothing will be able to truly overcome. Actually, there's two things. I had to bring a TV out for this one. Not everybody wears glasses. A lot of people choose to wear contacts because glasses make you look like a nerd. Or maybe people just don't like how they feel on their face. Either way, these VR, AR glasses are always going to change how you look in public, and phones do not. And that is actually going to be a big deal for a lot of people. The other concern, the far larger concern, the biggest issue here of all, is that most people don't want to use it. In fact, a lot of people can't even use it. Okie dokie. So in the past, I've argued that VR motion sickness is a problem that could be solved. Because to some people, it has been solved. It's generally assumed that the longer you use VR headsets, the better you feel inside of them. So if you only use them for a day, you might feel sick, but after a week or a month, you get used to it. Maybe. By increasing the refresh rate of displays, by decreasing the latency of motion tracking, it can all allow for a better experience. But I don't think this problem can ever go away. We know that up to 70% of the people that use VR feel sick after just using it for 15 minutes. And look, that's not that surprising. But of course, most people aren't going to stick around for more than 15 minutes if this stuff makes them feel sick. Initial impressions are important. But I've always assumed that in the future, technology would improve to a point where a majority of people don't feel sick as soon as they get into these headsets. But I was wrong. So researchers in Korea back in 2020 suggested that even as VR technology improves, there isn't a decrease in motion sickness for the people using the VR headsets. Now, I'm not entirely qualified to dive into a study like this, but from what I can tell, there's just something in people's brains, certain people's brains, that make them uncomfortable when using VR headsets. Something that no amount of technology or latency or refresh rates or fancy lenses could ever get around. And that's a problem. Another study suggests that people that regularly play normal video games are just as likely to feel motion sickness as non-gamers in these headsets. Much like 3D glasses, there is a percentage of the population that simply can't use VR or can't see the 3D effect. But even for the people that can see in virtual reality glasses, there's not really a good way to solve this motion sickness problem. The only way to make people feel more comfortable using these headsets is if they only use it for like 30 minutes at a time. Put the headset on for 30 minutes and take it off. There's no other consumer electronics device today that has any problem even close to this. Imagine if your phone just started to physically hurt you after you used it for more than half an hour. What does VR offer? What does AR offer that can possibly make up for causing you actual pain? For some people, none of this will ever be an issue, and VR will always be a perfectly viable technology, and that's fine. But I don't think this thing's ever gonna really take off. Fundamentally, this concept can't go mainstream. And honestly, I think that's fine, because who wants to be stuck in this thing all day anyway? Again, huge thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. The first 500 people to click and use the link in the description below will get access to Skillshare for 1 month for free. Get started today.